News class. Today we're going to read The Carbon Monster. One day, a boy called George noticed a tiny line of footprints behind him. Every day, George checked the unusual sludgy footprints, and every day they appeared, he began to realise he was being followed. This went on for weeks, until one day George spotted a strange little creature trailing behind him. The creature was wearing a name tag. Its name was Carbon Monster. At first, Carbon Monster didn't really bother George because it was so small. However, the monster started to grow. It got bigger and bigger and bigger. The bigger it got, the bigger its oily, slippery footprints got, and the larger its footprint got, the more of a problem it became for George. It never spoke, it only grunted. It never smiled, and it only frowned. At first, George wasn't sure what the carbon monster wanted or what to feed it on. Ugh! Was all it said when George offered it real food. But still the monster grew. How can the monster keep growing without being fed? Then, one day, George spotted the monster munching on a sweet wrapper he'd thrown on his bedroom floor. Later that day, he caught it crunching on an old plastic bottle. George soon realised that Carbon Monster liked eating junk. Things like yoghurt pots, plastic bottles, cardboard boxes, plastic bags, packaging, tin cans and newspapers. Carbon Monster ate everything George put in the bin. After breakfast, it squashed an empty cereal box and it swallowed it whole. After school, it rummaged in George's sandwich box and ate the scrunched up ball of shiny tinfoil and slippery banana skin. After dinner, it crunched and munched all the packaging and even ate an empty tin can. It really wasn't fussy. Carbon Monster didn't waste anything. It ate all the rubbish up. It even liked wasted electricity. Every time George left the light on or the television on standby, it slumped on the floor and made a terrible slurping sound until George switched them off. As each day went by, the monster got bigger and bigger until one day it could no longer fit through the bedroom door. It even had started to smell, and sometimes it would breathe out horrible grey smoke. George tried telling the monster to go away, but it just ignored him. It was too busy picking its jagged teeth to notice George. "How selfish," groaned George. "You're nothing more than a dirty, horrible monster full of waste," shouted George as loud as he could. Carbon Monster took no notice. It burped, which made George feel sick. George had a big problem. He didn't want a huge, growing monster following him around. "What am I going to do?" George thought about the monster all week. As each day went by, Carbon Monster just kept on growing. Finally, on Saturday, George was so fed up he decided to sneak around the house, trying to avoid Carbon Monster and his horrible smell. He darted into the bathroom and quickly switched the light off. Then he rushed downstairs to switch the television off before Carbon Monster appeared to slurp up the wasted energy. After dinner, George sorted the recycling. He put a glass jar, a metal tin can and a plastic bottle in the right recycling bins just in case a smelly burping monster with horrible oily footprints appeared to gobble them up. You've got metal cans, his plastic and glass bin and a paper and card bin. On Sunday, George spent all day making sure he didn't leave any waste lying around. He tried really hard not to use things that had any packaging just so that he didn't have to see gigantic carbon monster. He ripped his empty cereal boxes up and popped them into the compost bin with the vegetable peelings and the garden waste. He put his empty yogurt pot in the recycling bin with all the plastic and reused an empty plastic bottle as a drink container. He switched the lights off in every room of the house and even turned off a dripping tap. At the end of the day, George crept up to the bed quietly, feeling very pleased that he'd not seen Carbon Monster. He tiptoed into his room and peeped out of the window to see if he could spot Carbon Monster in the garden, but there was no sign of it anywhere. Before climbing into bed, he switched everything off, including the bathroom light, which he normally left on. With a big smile on his face, George snuggled up and thought about all the things he'd done that day to make sure he hadn't left any waste. He was really proud of himself for managing to trick the monster, who was nowhere to be seen. Just as George was about to go to sleep, he heard a very quiet rustling sound coming from under his bed. He quickly grabbed his torch and peered into the direction of the noise, and there, squashed right in the corner, was a much smaller Carbon Monster. "What's happened to you?" asked George with amazement. The Carbon Monster didn't reply. He just sat staring, waiting. George knew that he was waiting for, but he also knew to make sure his Carbon Monster's footprint didn't get any bigger. George realised the size of the Carbon Monster was up to him. He knew he was stuck with a monster, but he also knew he could change the size of it by making sure he created little waste as possible. And that's what he did. He reduced, reused and recycled as much as he could. How big is your Carbon Monster? So, in Seuss class we have made our own Carbon Monster out of the recycled things that we could find in the classroom. And so what we would like you to do is, do you think you could try and make your own Carbon Monsters out of all your recycled things in your house? And can you send them to Miss O'Neill so that we can see them? Bye!